Hello my friends, and welcome to Baldur's Gate 3's Patch 7. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're going to be looking at the Patch 7 updates and talking about what significant gameplay changes have happened in this massive patch for Baldur's Gate 3, and how that's going to affect builds, party compositions, and play decisions, how you approach fights, and everything moving forwards. Obviously, I'm coming at this a little bit later than everyone else. I was out of town when the patch launched, but I think it will still be extremely useful to go over the gameplay changes, talk about buffs and nerfs, and whether they're important to specific, very common builds, or how that will enable new strategies moving forwards. Talk about different changes to fights, because a lot of very difficult fights or important fights in the game have been updated significantly in Patch 7, so I'm going to talk about how you might approach those differently moving forward, and just give you a solid basis for how to approach Baldur's Gate in the modern era. Let's just dive right into it. So first up, obviously, the big change in this patch is the story changes, the addition of a bunch of evil endings. I'm going to be skipping over most of that to talk about how the patch affects builds and combat moving forward, but obviously it's incredible that they're still adding more story to this already massive game, and very cool that they're putting in content for that only a tiny percentage of players will ever see. Most players haven't finished the game. In fact, the majority of players didn't make it out of Act 1. And most players who do play good characters rather than evil characters. So it's really cool, and it's one of the things that makes Larian so special as a developer, that they're putting so much time and effort, even a year post-launch, into producing things for just a small segment of their audience. So really awesome to see that. Patch 7 has a ton of additional endings and additional story choices, mostly for evil characters, including a pretty highly anticipated bit, which is a spoiler, of course, for Dark Urge playthrough, but we now get a more detailed interaction with Alfira, which I'm looking forward to seeing if there's ways to glitch that and keep her as a permanent companion going forwards. I'm sure people have been working on that very extensively. Obviously, we can use mods for that, but it would be fun if you could get a way to do that in the vanilla game. Speaking of mods, a mod manager was added, which will, an in-game mod manager, which will enable tons of creativity and expressions of mods, keep the game fresh and built on the solid foundation going forwards. I really like that they did this. I think it was really important to the long-term health of the game, especially if you compare it to something like Skyrim, which people are still playing a decade and a half later, because of the incredibly inventive and long-lived modding scene that games like that have. It's really great to see that they care about the long-term health of Baldur's Gate. Other than that, though, we're going to skip past modding stuff. I will be doing a deeper dive into mods later on, but we're going to skip past mods because for the moment, we don't need need to talk about any of that, and get to changes to vanilla gameplay. So first up, evil endings. I already talked about that. Mod manager, revamped split screen gameplay. That's very cool. That I think will make it just easier to play multiplayer. But let's get to the meat of things and talk about honor mode combat. So the first honor mode fight that was changed significantly was the Dror Ragzlin fight. Now, if you push him into the spider pit, he's going to try to take control of the spiders and bring them into the combat with you. And the spiders are pretty dangerous enemies early in the game, so that can make that fight a lot harder. I think in general, this won't have a significant impact. That was one way to cheese the fight, was by pushing him into the pit. Then he'd have to either fight the spiders or run around. You could bring the spiders into combat with a bunch of the goblins, and now you can't do that. But all of the normal ways to cheese that fight still exist, and of course, he's still a neutral character, so you can still try to get a surprise round. You can still take the fight from the ceiling. There's lots of different options to approach this fight, and I think that this will make it harder. It removes one avenue to cheese the fight, and it adds a condition where things can go more badly wrong if something weird happens and the spiders enter the fight with you. But mostly, I think this won't significantly change how this fight plays out. One that will change, though, is the Bulette fight, which now has the Diamond Scales condition and the Shredding Scales legendary action. Diamond Scales gives it 100 temporary hit points, and it can't be hurt by any damage that's 15 or less. So you need to deal instances of 15 or more damage in a single attack in order to harm the Bulette at all. That can be pretty difficult for some parties early in the game. If you're a hand crossbow build or another build that relies on lots of small attacks, then you may find it difficult to reach 15 damage with a single damage instance early on. And so the Bulette could be quite challenging for unprepared parties. You're going to need to bring effects that deal a ton of damage all at once to make sure that you burst through it. The Shredding Scales reaction is not horrible. It's 3d6 damage and inflicts bleed. So for melee combatants, that can be pretty dangerous, but not the end of the world. But mostly it's going to be that if you don't pass the damage check on the Bulette, you could end up in a lot of danger because just not being able to harm it with small damage instances could make some parties really struggle to fight this enemy. Malice Thorm can now pull you towards him, which is not a significant change to that fight, and of course that fight is already skippable through dialogue, so I don't think that will affect most honor mode runs significantly. If you do end up fighting him, he won't be that much harder. The spectator fight, I think, also got significantly more challenging. They will now have available, as you hit them, they'll build up stacks of a condition, and then at 5 stacks, they're going to fire off a gigantic AoE with some pretty nasty debuffs associated with it. It can paralyze and frighten, and also does quite a lot of damage. It's a con save, so many parties will be able to pass the save against it, but if you don't, then this could be devastating, so you're really going to need to watch your spacing, or try to carefully manage the stacks of the condition on the spectators in order to stop this from going off. So that's going to make this fight much more difficult to manage. The sort of normal strategy for this was just to burst it down as quick as possible, but if it interrupts you with the gigantic Ocular Nightmare debuff, that could be pretty dangerous for a lot of parties, especially if you're tightly packed or closely clustered around it. So you will need to approach this combat a little more carefully than you did before. The Githyanki ambush now requires maybe a slightly different approach, the Githyanki ambush in Act 2, because now as her allies die, she's going to get a powerful buff, which could make her pretty dangerous. It's not, in my opinion, going to significantly change how you approach the combat. You may want to prioritize bursting down the leader more heavily than you did before, but overall I think that this combat will still be approached pretty much the same. You can try to lock them down with AoE, or use enhanced leap or flight conditions to get out of their reach of most of the enemies and just kill them from above because they don't have a lot of ranged attacks. So there are different ways to approach this which have not significantly been changed. I don't think you're going to have to adjust your strategy that much. Maybe focus on the boss a little bit faster. The fight at the Knights of the Shield hideout, the boss now has a legendary action that gives an ally 50 temp HP and prevents them from being incapacitated. This I don't think is a significant change. By this point in the game, 50 temp HP is pretty easy to burn through, and preventing them from being incapacitated is definitely bad, though there's ways around that. There are some conditions that don't count as incapacitation that will still probably work unless those have also been fixed in patch 7, which I kind of hope they have. But even so, you should be able to kill most enemies through a 50 temp HP shield by this point in the game without too much trouble. And Taurus now has a legendary action where when he's hit, he inflicts a massive debuff, reducing your physical stats, gives you 50 temporary hit points, but as long as you have those temporary hit points, you and nearby allies cannot harm him, so it's sort of reverse sanctuary. This will change the fight if you were going to take more than one turn to kill him, I think. Basically, the strategy now is, he only has 200 hit points, so the strategy now is probably try to just have 3 party members burn him down in a single turn. Your first party member will attack, receive this debuff, and be unable to continue fighting, and your remaining 3 party members will have to kill him very quickly. This could make him extremely dangerous for solo play, though, unless I'm misunderstanding something about the ability, because you're going to have to find a way to burn those 50 temporary hit points off of yourself in order to be able to fight him solo, because you can't harm him as long as you have those temp HP, so you need to get rid of them. Or have him hit you and remove them. So he could now be an extremely threatening enemy for solo honor mode play. I don't think will significantly change for parties, but definitely one to keep an eye out for. This was already a fight that had the potential to be very dangerous if things start to go wrong, because as the fight goes long, his stacking debuffs and everything can become quite challenging to deal with. So I think that adding this means that you are really incentivized to end the fight in a single turn, and in solo play, that's going to be much, much harder now. So Taurus is one that I think is going to be a real run killer for solo honor mode playthroughs. Gonna have to test that a little further, of course. Maybe I'm misunderstanding how it works, but just not being able to attack after hitting him once, really dangerous debuff for solo play. Most UI changes I don't think will be significant. Obviously, great to see them updating the UI. Let me just skim through here. Fix the wrong spell ability showing up when selecting a feat during a level up. I don't know if this means that it will now display properly for magic. If you take like Magic Initiate Druid to pick up Shillelagh, will it properly display that it's going to use that the Shillelagh will use the ability score from your current class, not from Druid, or is this just a different issue that they are fixing? Just gonna have to look at that as I build characters and see what has been updated, and of course whether the Shillelagh trick still works, because I hope they haven't gotten rid of that. That was a fun one. If you want more on that, you can refer to a couple of my recent builds, like the Genius Fighter. For gameplay changes, this is the big one. We are looking at custom mode using honor mode mechanics when you start a new playthrough. Huge, obviously, really great for everybody who was worried about game-breaking bugs, preventing you from just playing honor mode. If you don't care about the golden dice specifically, then you can play all the fun honor mode stuff, and I highly recommend doing this. If you were worried that honor mode would be too stressful for you, because having only a single save file and potentially losing hours and hours of progress is stressful, it's awesome that you can now play with all the cool mechanics without having to mod the game or anything. Great change, one that I and many others have been agitating for a long time. The Kyotoa will now support you in the final battle. Probably won't change that much. They're not particularly tough fighters. Friendly Steel Watcher, on the other hand, that could be a pretty useful update. Group Hide will no longer affect summons that aren't linked to the group in the party line. Sure. And other than that, I'm not seeing significant updates under this section. I think it's under Combat and Balance that they put most of the balance changes. It's no longer going to eat more than your share of camp supplies. You can't cheese the Leap of Faith. Sure, that's obviously a good fix. But most of these are bug fixes. Animation, we can safely skip, although again, love to see these updates. Writing and flow, again, love to see story updates this late into the game's life cycle. I will leave for you to explore these at your leisure as you play through the game, because here we're going to focus on gameplay changes. Scripting updates, fixed some bugs, broken kissing scenes, endgame states. Avatar is... Oh, this is huge. Ensured the avatar is prioritized as the main speaker in dialogues related to the Hag's Act 1 surrender. This has driven me nuts since the very beginning of the game. Since I first played the game. I had this problem in my very first playthrough and have twisted myself into knots to avoid it. This will make getting Ethel's hair much, much more reliable. Because you can now, if your avatar is spec'd for dialogue, make sure that you have the ability to pass the dialogue checks in order to get Ethel's hair while still fighting her. So great fix. Glad they finally did that. You can give Gale magic items from the Traveler's Chest. He'll leave if you refuse to do so. Nice that you can give Gale items from the Traveler's Chest. Performance and stability updates, awesome, of course. Love to see it. Cinematics updates, great. Crashes, obviously a ton of crash fixes. Hopefully, if you've been affected by a crash, this has fixed it for you. But again, we can pretty safely skip past most of these. In terms of looking at major gameplay changes to get to Combat and Balance. In combat and balance, we have fixed a soft lock, fixed form of dread, triggering a saving throw for frightened if the character was already frightened. I think this could potentially cancel frightened on enemies, which is nice to get rid of. Upcasts of Witchbolt can no longer be twinned. That was a bug that was introduced in the last patch where they tried to prevent you from twinning Witchbolt because it's a channeled spell. So you can no longer twin upcasted Witchbolt. That will make the Lightning Lord build less efficient at maximum level because you won't be able to do as much damage. The 300 guaranteed damage, you're going to have to use Chromatic Orb Lightning instead, which I think does something like 260 guaranteed damage with a critical hit. I am not certain if they have also removed the ability to twin Chain Lightning when cast from Marka Heshkir, which was another issue when they tried to remove the ability to twin Chain Lightning. They didn't to twin Chain Lightning. They didn't get rid of the ability to twin the version cast by Marka Heshkir. For some reason, that was very complicated for me to say, but I got there in the end. So I'm not certain if they've removed that. We will potentially test it later in this video, but this will change one of the builds that I and many others have occasionally used for Honor Mode, one of my most popular build videos. So I'll probably update that video to reflect that you can no longer twin Witchbolt, meaning you're going to have to use Chromatic Orb instead. Fixed a bug with the goaded condition, where if a summon companion applied goaded to an enemy. That's good, because then your summon can actually tank for you the way it was supposed to. Dampen elements will no longer require a channel divinity point. That is huge. So Dampen elements was the level 6 nature cleric ability, required a channel divinity point, and as a reaction, gave you resistance to incoming elemental damage for you or a party member. This is a massive update, because now it works basically the same as improved Warding Flare from Light Cleric. It's going to be less efficient overall, less useful overall than Warding Flare, because you get attacked more often than you take elemental damage. But clerics can often lack reactions in general, and don't always have amazing uses for their reaction. Having one that will trigger almost every turn, because a lot of enemies do at least incidental elemental damage, and will significantly improve your party's survivability. I think this is going to be massive for nature clerics, which were already a top tier pick for clerics. Nature clerics, I think, were already the third best cleric after Light and Tempest, and this just makes them even better. You can combine this with characters with high dexterity in order to quarter incoming damage from like a fireball. You can combine it with Ancient's Paladin's Aura, which halves damage from spells. Probably, unless they've coded those both as resistances so they don't stack, but I think they will, in order to quarter damage from spells. So Dampen Elements is now a hugely powerful ability. Big power spike for Nature Clerics at level 6, and will be useful in a lot of fights throughout the game. It's true that having Dampened Elements require a short rest resource wasn't the end of the world, because you probably weren't taking elemental damage that you really needed to reduce more than once or twice every short rest. But just making it resource free means you can spam this ability, so your party will be taking significantly less damage throughout the entire game. Deflect missiles will now more reliably hit enemies. That's not massive, because of course, in order to shoot a missile back at an enemy, you have to reduce the damage to 0 with your deflect missiles reaction, and spend a key point, so it's pretty resource intensive and for not that much damage, but nice for when you do want to use this ability. Monk's Clinch of the North Wind spell, I think that's the 4 elements monk's equivalent of Hold Person. Now targets up to 2 characters at level 9. Yes, they do just have to clench a little harder. That is a pretty underused ability in general. It's not, and by underused, I mean it's not one that's going to get used even when it targets 2 characters. That makes it the equivalent of a 3rd level spell slot, which is not horrible, but not amazing. And the save DC likely won't be that high. If you're building a sort of caster 4 elements monk, then this will be a nice upgrade to that character. NPCs can no longer use dash. Saving throw for Dire Raven's Bad Omen is now a wisdom save. I don't remember what save it was before, but that's the one that lets you curse enemies to gain advantage against them. Fungal Infestation can now summon a zombie when killing a character, right? That's the Spore Druid ability. That's pretty cool, because it means you can do it as part of another action and summon zombies in combat, which will really power up the ability to do that. So I really love that, and Spore Druid, I think this will end up being a bigger buff than you might think, because it will let you sort of distract enemies by using a reaction to summon a zombie when you kill an enemy. Spectator's Charm, Druid spells that Halcyon gains can now be updated. Cloud Kill. Just skimming through a lot of these. Swapping weapons between characters in combat now consumes an action for both. That fixes an exploit where you could swap weapons while spending only one action, and in some cases swap weapons spending 0 actions and actually gain actions in some weird circumstances. So hopefully that has been fixed with an exploit where you could potentially gain infinite actions. Anti-Ethel's Weird Magic Surge not triggering with Counterspell. That's good. That will make Counterspell less of an I win button for that fight. Meanlock Fear was a con save instead of a wisdom save. Sure. Priestess Gut will no longer hit herself with her own conditions. That will make that fight a little bit harder, though that was never a difficult fight. And fixed a bug where the combat at last light would end. No further waves would spawn. Just looking for significant changes here. HP that the undead nurses resurrect at from 25% to 45% during the combat with Malice Form in Tactician and Honor. Again, you'll often talk your way past this combat, but that will make it more difficult, because burning down the ads was one way you could make that fight easier. Your gear, you can no longer just know where he is when he's invisible, so that's good. Harder to cheese that fight. Improved the Thistlewold Thorm combat in Honor mode. Damage and radius of his legendary action. Explosion increases the damage of the buff given to his bladed allies. Alright, so this is a pretty huge change to this fight. I think this will now be a much more challenging fight, and this was already a pretty tough fight. So that could be pretty dangerous. Shadowed Spirit of the Land combat. Shadow Friends. That's just fixing bugs with this combat, mostly. Cazador can use legendary action in Mist form. That will make him more dangerous. Taurus now has Alert and Legendary Resistance in Tactician mode, which he will get carried through to Honor mode. I don't remember if he had those properly in Honor mode or not. If not, that will give him, because I think he has maxed stats. He's just like 20 in every stat because he's the perfect Gith. That should give him a plus 10 initiative bonus, meaning you're going to have to stack initiative to go first. Combined with the other buffs to this character, that could make this fight a sleeper killer, one that's going to be very dangerous. Issues related to Gortash's turrets, lots of VFX fixes, which are very important, but not what we're focusing on here. And Viconia's Divine Intervention won't target followers of Shar anymore, even if they're enemies. That's kind of cool. I love that for flavor. Again, that won't significantly change the combat, but it is very cool. And enemies in High Hall should now leave combat when knocked out. Improve her chances of survival. Hope now gets Death Ward when she enters combat. That's good, because you could die accidentally a lot of the time. Raphael will now walk on fire or hellfire, which he's immune to, so great. Fixing his pathing a little bit. Improve the fight against Leroican. Elemental Retort now costs a reaction to cast. Targets will now roll a save, and Myrmidons give him additional reactions. Interesting. So I think that makes this fight much easier overall. He won't get infinite elemental retorts. Still a lot of them because he's getting additional reactions from the Myrmidons, but this fight could be pretty tough, and I think has been nerfed a little bit if I'm reading this tooltip correctly. Moving through everything else here. Enemy wolf summon, Cazador's bats and werewolves, casting dominate person on dollar before combat. Will no longer need lead to enemies. Yeah, so no other significant changes there. But under the gameplay section, they do section out these patch updates weirdly, where there's not really just one category for everything that changed when it comes to mechanics and gameplay for your characters, which is what we're looking at. So I do have to skim, unfortunately, a little bit, but let's go on into gameplay. Improved AI pathfinding around dangerous areas. Love it. That was one of my biggest complaints with the game, was your characters would just hurl themselves into every trap and every possible dangerous area. They'll stand in flaming spheres. They'll stand in cloud of daggers after combat ends, so you'd have to rapidly re-pause and cancel those spells immediately in order to stop your allies from taking extra damage. Hopefully this has fixed that very annoying issue. Fixed an exploit, fixed a bug. Enemies drop loot when you reduce their ability scores to 0, so if you're using intellect drain to kill enemies, that's that will be helpful. Fixed a bug that prevented Monk's Shadow Step from giving advantage for Rogue's sneak attack. That's very cool, because now you can pop out of the shadow and sneak attack an enemy. You need to have at least 6 levels in Monk to get Shadow Step, so you won't have more than 3d6 of sneak attack dice for this combo, but a character that pops out of the shadows and slits throats is, of course, a power fantasy for a roguish monk-type character. You can play sort of Nightcrawler, jumping from shadow to shadow, and this ability archetype should now work. You can probably keep an eye out, spoilers I guess, you can probably keep an eye out for a build guide based on this now that it functions sometime in the coming days. Fixed an issue causing Tempest Domain Cleric's Channel Divinity to not deal maximum damage. It was very annoying when it wouldn't do that, so very useful fix there. A number of other bug fixes here. Custom characters don't follow your prevented summoners and followers like Glut summons and followers like Glut from being able to consume noble stock. Yeah, sometimes it would just disappear, and I guess the mage hands were eating it. I think there's also a bug where the owlbear cub would eat your the anti-magic flower, whose name I'm blanking on right now, and I think sometimes also some important story consumables like noble stock. So I wonder if this will also have fixed that bug. That is very funny, though, that sometimes your owlbear cub would eat your noble stock. Number of dialogue fixes and crime things. NPCs will now react as though a crime was committed when they succeed on saving throws against hostile spells. So you no longer get infinite tries to land dangerous spells against enemies, which is very useful, of course, because that was obviously very cheesy when you could just infinitely spam spells over and over, and the enemies wouldn't notice until it succeeded, so you never needed high DC for that to, like, knock out a traitor and take all their stuff. That will maybe reduce some of the exploits available for combats against neutral characters, though the game gives you so many options to just win any fight against characters that don't start hostile that I think you will still be able to do that in many ways if that's what you're inclined to do. You can... Multiple spots for perception checks were made through objects. Fixed the Illithid Power Mind Sanctuary now consumes resources when consuming potions. This will mostly only apply to Tactician or below, where it does a different thing, but will fix a bug here. fixed the gibbous of the Worshipful Servant, not generating momentum at the start of combat. I hadn't noticed it not working, though I can't say I've equipped this item that much, so it may have been bugged. The Haste Helm was bugged for a long time, so this one might have suffered from the same bug and has been fixed, which would be great. And a number of other bug fixes. You can no longer loot the underwear of non-recruited companions when you knock them out. Good, I guess. If you were doing that, then stop. But the game has now stopped you from doing that. Act 1. Fix the owlbear sometimes disappearing from camp when killing goblins in the goblin camp. When playing Dark Urge, Alfira will now actually join your party as a controllable character if there's room for her in your party setup. Alfira doesn't have a tadpole, can be leveled up, and can't use the magic mirror. Interesting. So she can't use the mirror, but can be leveled up. So that means that we can do character builds using Alfira very temporarily. I don't know if she can be respec'd at Withers, but I'll test that out as soon as possible. And that means that there probably are glitches that we can do to prevent the Dark Urge thing from triggering and keep her as a permanent companion. That will probably break the game in a host of ways, but I will be very interested to see how people figure out how to do that. Sort of like the corruption glitch with your Final Fantasy VII saves to try to keep Aerith alive, I guess. Attacking the Zent inside the Zentrum hideout will now pull everyone into combat, sure. Get more XP. Looking for more significant changes. Nothing here that is significant. Gale no longer has Netherese or Blast in the Netherbrain Psyche. Makes sense, because you're not in your physical bodies. A rat at Basilisk Gate will now come back after a long rest if you attacked it, sure. Crimson Mischief and Murderous Cuts prey upon the weak passive, now properly works against enemies with 50% HP or below. Great. That's good. Good fix for Crimson Mischief, of course. Important fix for that item. There is also a siren outside, so I'm going to briefly pause the recording and let that go, because you're probably hearing that on the microphone. And we are back. I was worried I was going to be arrested for spending too long looking at Baldur's Gate 3 patch notes and overanalyzing them, but turns out that that's not actually a crime, and if it was, then I am a proud criminal. So let's get back to it. Fixed issues with the portrait, fix the interaction with the Spell Savant amulet with the smite spells, Divine Smite, create sorcery points, so you can no longer use the Spell Savant amulet for infinite sorcery points. Obviously good, that was a dumb bug. Of course, it won't affect you if you weren't exploiting that bug regardless, but now you can't, so you'll have to figure out some other way to break the game, which I'm sure you are ingenious enough to do. Fix protection from evil and good, not protecting from Incubus Charm. Great, it should do that. It's supposed to. And a number of other small changes. Flow and scripting, this looks like mostly sound and VFX things. Tutorial and Act 1 flow and scripting changes. I'm just going to very quickly skim through these. The hag will no longer react to spells, so you can now use guidance in honor mode on the skill check to get her to give you her hair. So that's pretty good, because she would be able to use a legendary action, and that could break the dialogue with that character. So that's a good fix there, and no longer will punish you for casting guidance or enhance ability during that sequence. So you can continue to spam guidance to your heart's content. Number of story changes and bug fixes, but none that affect combat. And fixed a potential initiative spam. Okay, no, that's just I was saying, I saw the word initiative and got excited there, but that is not something that changes combat significantly. And it looks like we have passed most of the major buffs, nerfs, and changes. These are mostly fixes and scripting changes to combats and various sequences in the for gameplay. And so we can quickly skim past the scripting and flow section and see if there are any other significant changes for what we're talking about in this video. Performance, obviously great fixes to performance. Awesome to see updates to performance, updates to UI and everything, like we talked about. Really glad to see all of these fixes made, and this is a ton of fixes, making sure quest objectives appear. Ooh, I love this. Fix the common and reactions tab of the character sheet missing for recently recruited companions. You would sometimes, if you respect or recruited a companion, have to save and load in order to turn on their ability to use reactions, which was very annoying and could definitely get some people killed if they weren't paying attention when they got a new character. So great fix there. And they fixed the Eldritch Knight and Battlemaster subclass icons, which were swapped. You may remember that this confused the heck out of me when I was doing my subclasses tier list, so great to see that. Hopefully a lot of tooltip changes as well in this patch. They have mentioned a number of tooltip changes and everything, but we will see if there are more specific ones, again, as I go through more changes in-game. Multiplayer and split screen, character creation and level up. Nothing significant there. Tooltips. Fix the tooltip showing a wisdom instead of intelligence roll. Some tooltips incorrectly indicating that they trigger a saving throw. Oh, nice. Improved damage breakdown tooltips for reflected damage in the combat log. That could be pretty confusing because it just lumped it all together so you wouldn't know how you were taking damage. And hopefully that is just the tip of the tooltip of the iceberg, and they've done a number of other tooltip fixes because I would love to see those. Some tooltips were pretty confusing in the game already, and it would be great to have those clarified. Level design, art, animation, all awesome to see. Fixes, sound, VFX, writing, cinematics, and these are all going to contain a lot of spoilers as well. So there we go. So I think the big winners in this patch are going to be Nature Clerics. That's the class that received the most direct and significant buff. But the main thing is that a lot of honor mode combats got more difficult and more challenging, and you're going to have to pay more attention to the Bulette, to Taurus, especially. I think those two are going to be quite a bit more dangerous, and the Act 2 bosses if you fight them instead of skipping them through dialogue. Overall, loving what I'm seeing in patch 7. I think this is a great way to update the game. Of course, there are probably hundreds or thousands of undocumented changes in the patch as well, if previous patches are anything to go by. So if you have encountered significant balance updates or things that change the way you have been building characters or approaching certain combats, definitely do not hesitate to let me know in the comments. I would really appreciate that. But overall, it looks like there are some pretty significant fight changes. A big buff to Nature Clerics, small buff to 4 Elements Monks, and a buff to Shadow Monk Rogue multiclasses, which was an archetype that didn't really work the way you wanted it to before and now does. So really liking to see that. And I expect to see a lot more Nature Clerics in honor mode parties moving forwards. Alright, my friends, hope you enjoyed this look at the patch 7 updates, and I hope you have been having fun with patch 7 in the week that you've had this before I did. And definitely let me know if there's any changes that I missed in these patch notes. And of course, we will continue to build characters, explore these new combats, and take a look at mods in the coming weeks. Cheers, my friends. Thanks as always for watching, and of course, you can hit like, leave a comment, helps me out with the algorithm, and subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 analysis and other strategy game content. Cheers! I'll catch you next time.